left, right.
Yo, what's up? Thank you for joining us for this episode 71 of SipTalk. Today we're talking about the difference in generations. I'm going to tell you, if you're listening to me now, you're not going to like what I have to tell you. You are part of the weakest generation. All right, see you on the other side, and thank you so much again for joining. This is really getting fun, and we owe that to you guys, so thank you. Much appreciated. This is SipTalk. Grab a drink and enjoy.
Of course, let's go.
Cheers.
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 You ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. So this is episode 71 of SipTalk. My name is Justin DiGiulio. On the other end, we have James the Boswell, professional soccer referee, professional accountant, philosopher, and bartender, coming at you from South Carolina. So, James, you want to tell everybody what we're talking about today?
So the general topic today is just comparing. Like I wanted to call this talk "In Defense of Millennials," and it's kind of a more polite way of saying "Okay, Boomer." The thing that got me thinking about this topic is if you're not aware of what's going on right now in the stock market, there's one particular stock that's been getting a lot of interest, and that's GameStop. Now, as a company itself, it's kind of garbage.
Wait, GameStop is becoming a good stock?
Yes.
GameStop is like the video game retailer.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Basically, what's happening is so the company itself is garbage, but its stock is on a historic tear right now, and the reason for it is, the stock was being heavily shorted, which means that institutional buyers were borrowing shares from the public to then eventually resell later for a lower price. So they're selling now and then they're going to rebuy them later for a lower price. So basically sell high, buy low. It's the opposite of a traditional stock price thing where you normally you want to buy low, sell high. This is doing the same thing, but in reverse, where you sell high and then rebuy low. And so a whole bunch of people noticed that a lot of shares were being shorted, and they decided that they were going to try and fight against the institutions that were doing this. And when a stock has a lot of shorts, it means that if the stock goes up, the short sellers lose money, and if they lose enough money, they have to do what's called covering their shorts. Where if they're down too much money, they have to rebuy the shares even if they're not ready to, which causes increased activity in the stock and increased price, and it's kind of a feedback loop. But this all came to be from Wall Street Bets on Reddit. And it's mostly millennials that are just doing super risky trades on the stock markets. And I'm looking at this more of like the news coverage is making this sound like it's institutions versus retail investors being like someone like you or me.
The stockholder.
Mm-hmm. Well, you could have a stockholder that's an institutional investor. You could have something like Goldman Sachs or something that's an institution. But a retail investor is like me who buys stocks, and I'm just one dude. But
they don't mean that you're investing in a retail store, which you
No. The retail market is basically non-institutional stock buyers and stock traders. Okay. So non-professionals is the retail market. And I look at this as kind of, I think millennials may have found one of the few ways to kind of get back at a generation that they feel has robbed them of a lot. Because right now, for example, one of the main institutions that's been shorting GameStop is down 15 or 20% on the year on their position on GameStop right now. They've lost so much money on this single trade because of what Wall Street Bets has been able to engineer. And it made me think.
But people started shorting GameStop because it's a physical location that sells actual DVD, Blu-ray type video games, right? So that's like, I mean, I think it's crazy that people still go to the store to buy a video game that you just can't download the game over a few hours,
Well, and you'd be right.
or have it mailed to you. Like I mean,
Right? Yeah. No,
so
you're right about all of this. That the market for the market in which GameStop operates is not favorable to the business model that they have. And so you've got a whole bunch of people looking at it and saying this company should go bankrupt at some point. And they're probably right. But this is not a fundamental event where the company did something really good and people are buying the stock because they think that the company is going to continue to do well. This is a technical event where the factors of supply and demand line up in such a way that people that are short in the stock can be forced into closing their positions at a loss because of the way that institutions do their ordering. And I don't want to get too much into the technicals and investing about this because that's not really what our podcast is about.
Yeah.
But the overarching theme that I'm looking at here is that this is like the first time that I've really seen millennials find some kind of power against the quote unquote boomer generation and be able to really have success in fighting back. And what I wanted to talk about tonight is boomers look at the millennials as lazy, entitled, and unsuccessful. And I don't think that's the case. I think that the argument that I'm going to make is that boomers had it easy and they don't realize that. And then once they succeeded from playing the game of life on easy mode, then they ratcheted up the difficulty so that nobody else could succeed after them. And I've got some numbers to prove my case.
Sure, but they didn't do it intentionally.
No, I think they did.
But also, yeah, there's a lot of other factors. I don't necessarily know that they're intentional factors, but let's go through real quick, kind of starting with baby boomer generation, which is effectively our parents, post World War II to the mid 60s.
Yep.
And then you have Generation X, which is like late 60s to
Gen X is later than that.
Well, I mean, that's the one right after baby boomer.
Really? Okay.
And everywhere. So I thought Gen X was like into the mid 80s, but it's really like 1980. And
1980 is kind of like the cutoff.
Yeah, I always identified as a Generation X because that was like the Pepsi generation. You're growing up like cusp of Generation Y, which is millennial. But I think maybe just in my family being kind of the youngest of like 17 different cousins, that they kind of pulled me, they had a little bit of pull towards the Generation X for me. But so Generation X ends at about 80, and then Generation Y / millennial is 80 to mid 90s.
Yeah, which we fall right in the middle of.
Yeah, and then you have, in the beginning of, and then you have Generation Z, which I didn't know there was a name for that, and that's 95, 96 to 2012-ish. And then you have basically anybody who's a baby now, and they're called like, a couple years old, calling that the alpha generation.
Okay. All right. Well, so.
But let me summarize.
Yeah,
so
keep on going.
You got baby boomers, World War II to mid 60s. Then you have Generation X, late 60s to 80. Millennials, 80 to 95 or so. And then Gen Z, 95 through 2012.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I've gotten into arguments with boomers about this because they really do think that that they didn't have any unique kind of blessings or anything when they were growing up. And I really disagree. And so I did some research before this podcast to pull up some basic numbers to show how strongly the deck has been stacked against us. Okay.
But I think I'm very curious kind of what you got in your back pocket. I obviously believe that there's a lot stacked up against us, but I also feel like the newer generations are much more pussified and they don't know how to work hard. And
who's to blame for that, honestly?
Well, the parenting.
Who who are the parents?
Yeah, exactly.
Boomers. Come on.
Yeah. So, but even more so, because there was another term I read for millennials, and they were called Latchkey Kids, and that's because both parents were working, and they kind of stayed home between like after school and when their parents came home from work, which is a few hours. But I think people nowadays are softer, and they're growing softer. But yeah, obviously everything is the system's perfectly designed for the output that you have, and what is the system? It's what came before the output. And that would be the boomers. So I want to know what you're, because I probably will argue a little bit this with you, but I think ultimately I'm going to fall on your side, as we typically find agreement on most things. But yeah.
All right, so I pulled a couple kind of key prices and economic measures to compare. So the things that I wanted to look at are, what are some of like the basic keys to wealth in today's society, and I think that they translate pretty closely to the keys to wealth in 1970 society. So all the numbers that I have are going to be compared between 1970 and 2019.
So okay, go ahead.
And I look at the keys to wealth. They're going to be, how much do you make? And how much does a house cost? Because for a lot of people, building wealth is very much tied up in the home that they own. That's like generally for most people, the largest pool of wealth that they have is in their house and the land on the house. Right?
Majority of the population, but
yeah. So wages, home cost, and the last two are going to be vehicle cost of just buying a car so that you can travel to jobs, and also education. How much does it cost to get an education?
You mentioned something about gas prices. I'm just curious. Do you have gas prices?
I do.
All right, cool. I'm just curious. All right. And I also read, about the declining value in education, and really Generation X, which is right before us, was the last generation where there was actually a solid return on investment when it came to dollars spent for education.
Well, and I think one thing that's really important to mention that gets lost in the data is that a lot of jobs today require a bachelor's degree or more, whereas in 1970, very few jobs required a graduate degree, and less jobs required a bachelor's degree. So
but also I think our education is slipping. But what I also came across when I was reading about this was that nowadays let me articulate it well. Right now, if you go to a school, the attention is placed on the slowest learners. Whereas, especially in a lot of other countries, the most attention is placed on the fastest learners and the most intelligent people. But we're increasingly dumbing things down, because that's just the trend that the United States is going, I think.
Yeah, I think that the whole idea of education in the United States versus the rest of the world is something that we really like. That's kind of outside the scope of where I want to go, because we can get lost in that alone for an hour.
Sure, but what I'm saying is, now, in order to get to the same level of learning, you need more education.
And yeah, it's a chicken or the egg argument there. But the point that I'm trying to make is that in 1970, it was easier to find a high-paying job without an advanced degree than it is today. So it's hard to assign a data value to this. But when I talk about the cost of education in 1970 versus today, you also need to factor in that the cost of education today is oftentimes a prerequisite for getting a job that didn't exist in 1970. Yeah. So it's a multiplicative effect, but I can't really assign a number value to it easily. But let's just start with wages.
Okay.
So minimum wage in 1970, and I'm going to give out two values. I'm going to give the 1970 value and then its inflation adjusted value. So 1970, the minimum wage was $1.60, which doesn't sound great. But when you adjust for inflation, minimum wage in 1970, $10.61. Minimum wage today, now it depends on what state you're in, but I'm going to go with the federal minimum wage because that's the floor. And that's also what I measured in 1970. Minimum wage today, $7.43, 30% lower.
Wow.
30% lower minimum wage right now.
It's just so wild that like there's no attention really.
Now here's two more, and this one these numbers tell a story. So when you talk about median wages, so that's going to be 50% of the wages are higher, 50% of the wages are lower.
Yeah.
Median wage in 1970 was $9,870. Adjust that up for inflation, 65 grand.
Okay.
Median wage in 2019 was 40,000. So that's a 39% decline.
Wow.
Now, the next one, this is misleading, is the average wage in 1970 was $7,700, adjusted for inflation, about 51 grand. 2019 average wage was 53,490. So what do those two numbers tell us when we compare the fact that the median wage in 2019 went down 39%, but the average wage went up 5%? What does that tell us?
Give me the numbers again. And
All right.
So median.
So the median wage went down 39% from 65 to 40.
Okay.
The average wage went up 5% from 51 to 53.5.
I think it sounds like you're losing a lot of the middle numbers.
Yeah, that's close enough.
Okay.
To me, what those numbers tell me is that income inequality has gotten worse, because for the average wage to go up but the median wage to go down means that you have to have a whole bunch of really big wages at the top that are skewing the average but not skewing the median. So what that tells me is that
because obviously the lower numbers are going to have a lower impact, so the higher numbers have to be really, really high.
Yeah, but you also have to look. Median looks at just like how many are above me, how many are below me.
Yeah, and obviously the median has fallen, which means there's a lot more below the average.
Yeah.
Just the average dollar amount is less, so it factors in a lesser.
Yeah, so if you were to take the average dollar amount, your average wage, and see what percentile that ranks in the median, it's going to be way above 60.
Yeah, so I think that means that
means that there's a lot more high earners and a lot more low earners.
Well, it doesn't mean there's a lot more high earners. It means the high earners are earning a lot more.
Okay, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it does not mean, it means the opposite. It does not mean there's a lot more high earners.
There's less high earners.
There's a lot more low earners. Yeah, it means there's a lot more low earners, and the high earners are earning more. So your CEOs are getting paid way more than they ever have before, which is fucking wild.
That's a statistic I didn't look up and I should have.
And these are publicly held companies, so that means the public is allowed, for the most part, and that means the public is allowing that to happen. Which does, I mean,
this is a trend also in private companies. It's just the data's harder to find.
Well, sure, but I think it really just means that it's a profitability issue. You can pay one guy a lot and a lot of people nothing, and the company makes more money. And you attribute it to the highest.
Right. So my point on all of this is that in 1970, it was a lot easier to have a living wage and even be able to save a little bit of money because the median wage was way higher.
Yeah, wild.
So when boomers say, "Well, we had to work hard during our day," sure, but you got paid more for it.
True, but I also believe that they had to work harder. And they were doing much more manual labor.
Do you think they had to work 40% harder? Because they made 40% more dollars.
Sure, but you got to define what's hard.
I'm just saying that. Do you think that working conditions in the 70s were 40% worse than they are now?
Doing a multiplication problem in the 70s was 40% more difficult.
Well, maybe for you.
We just have a lot more technology
but that's my point with the wages, is that wages there's a skew, and that it was easier to earn a living wage in 1970 than it is today.
If you were a mechanic, you were doing exactly the same job, more or less, adjusted for inflation for technology and cars, but really.
Yeah.
not much different.
All right, so that's wages. I think I've made my case there. Is that median wages going down 40%, average wages going up 5%. That tells me that income inequality has gotten way worse, but for the average person, and by that, median wage is a much better judge of what the average person's life is like, and median wage has gone down 40%. All right, next category, average home.
So most people are making less is all, because the average wage is a figure that is misleading.
Yeah, it's very misleading.
I think to leave it at that, the average wage may have gone up, but that's misleading because the median wage demonstrates that more people are making less money.
Yeah, and that's why I pulled the two numbers, is because I think you lose half the story if you don't. All right, average home cost. So 1970.
1970 average home cost. I'm going to take a guess.
Are you going to use inflation adjusted, or are you going to use the actual value?
I'm going to guess actual value, like 30 grand.
30 grand in 1970s dollars?
That's my guess.
You're close dollar wise, but percentage wise, you're not.
Okay. Well, what do you mean dollar wise?
Because you're off by.
If I looked at a deed or a sales contract from 1970, what amount would be on it?
17,000.
Oh fuck! So I was way over.
Yeah,
okay.
That's why I said dollar wise, you're kind of close, but percentage wise.
Okay, so what's that adjusted for inflation?
112.
Okay.
112, 113. We'll call it 113.
A house that you could buy in 1970, same house, if it was kept up, would be worth 117, whatever it was, 100.
No, so the inflation cost. So if you adjust the 17,000 up for inflation, you get to 113.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the house wouldn't be worth that, but in today's dollars, yeah. Okay, I got you.
Yeah. So, and again, these numbers are a little bit misleading, because you can also say that like houses today are built bigger and built better than 1970. But if you look at the average home cost in the United States, and I couldn't find median on this one, unfortunately, but the average home cost 1970, 113. 2019, 321.
Damn.
That's an increase of 185%. And that's inflation adjusted.
But people aren't buying 3 times the size home or 3 times the quality home.
I would agree. So what I'm saying is that the costs for entry are higher. That in 1970, if we look at it, here's an easy way to compare it. So if we take the median wage and do it and do housing cost as a multiple of median wage, in 1970 the multiplier was a little less than 2. 65,000 of the median wage, 113,000 for the home. So that's like 1.85 or so. Just doing the numbers off the top of my head. So in 2019. 40,000 to 320, multiplier of 8.
Yeah, that's wild.
So in 1970, you would have had to work for a little less than 2 years to fully pay off your home, assuming you had no other costs. In 2019, you would have to work for 8 years to pay off your home if you didn't have any other expenses.
What was a down payment on a home back then?
I don't know. I didn't look that up. I would imagine that it was probably about the same in terms of like percentage of home cost or whatever.
I think maybe it would have been more. I think probably
interest rates are higher back then, so it might have been.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. I mean, my thinking was just that now. What do you think you need to have down? What's 5% of a $300,000 house? 15. So now, if you have an iPhone that costs $1,000, you have an iPad that costs another $1,000. You've got you and your spouse have 2 cars. Back then, you probably had 1. What's the down payment or your monthly payment on a car? Everybody's got multiple TVs in their home at $500-$600 on a low end for a TV. So we have a lot more of these, material expensive objects that we will spend. Just I'll go out tomorrow and buy a fucking new iPad and just put it on a credit card. But if I didn't have these items, I could probably go down a list of shit that I've spent $8 or $9 grand on over the last year, and that would have been half of whatever down payment that I would need. buying a house. So I mean, that's kind of my counter argument. But yeah, obviously, the barrier of buying a home, the entry barrier of buying a home now is much, much higher. But we also have all this bullshit working against us.
Yeah, but here, I mean, I don't have to sell this idea to you because you've just lived it. What's the difference between burning money on rent every single month versus being able to start paying down a mortgage and build equity in a property?
Look,
how big of a difference is that?
I looked at my rent bill for the last 4 years, and I could have bought half of this house.
Mm-hmm.
Cash. So, which is just wild to even think about.
Right, and that's money that you're never going to get back, and you have nothing to show for it.
And that doesn't even include parking.
I'm talking obviously, but
well, I don't pay for parking now, so
because you own the parking lot.
Yeah, exactly. That's crazy.
So barrier to entry is buying a home is one of the most surefire ways to build wealth, and today it's 8 times more expensive. No, I'm sorry, about 4 times more expensive than it was in 1970.
Yeah, which is
when you couple the drop in median wage and the increase in housing price, it's about 4 times harder today to buy a home. That's just a huge barrier to millennials being able to build wealth.
Sure, but what was the population in 1970?
Doesn't matter.
Well, Alexa.
I'll just look it up for
you. What
you.
was the population of the United States in 1970?
Here's what I found on United States' Wikipedia page. The U.S. Census Bureau officially estimated the country's population to be 328,239,000.
Alexa.
No, shut her up. I've got this.
Stop.
I'm faster than her.
All right, go ahead.
1970 population, 205 million.
Okay, and now we have 330 something million.
330 to 350, somewhere in that range.
Okay, so all I'm getting at is you now have land is much more of a commodity now because you have almost double the
even if you consider a 50% increase in population, that doesn't get you to a 400% increase in asset price.
Fair enough, but you see where I'm going with this.
Okay. So I think I've made my case that it was easier to buy a home in 1970 than it is today, and that's a huge way to be able to build wealth over time.
Yeah, I agree. And so what else you have?
Cost of education.
Okay. Yeah. Now.
All right. So these are annual numbers. So obviously, if you're going to school for 4 years, you can multiply these numbers by 4. But annual numbers are what I pulled. So 1970, if you wanted to go to a public university, what was your tuition per year in 1970s dollars?
I don't have any idea.
Take a guess. You'd be blown away.
$150.
No, you're pretty close.
I mean, you said public institution, so
yeah. $405 is the average.
Wow.
Adjusted for inflation, about $2,700.
Okay, and what's a public school now?
In 2019, average cost was about 10,200.
10,000. So that's 40 grand.
40 grand versus
for a public school.
Public school. So yeah, like a public state university. If 4-year degree would have cost you a little over 10 grand, like 10,400 for 4 years, versus about 40,800 in 2019. So that's an increase of 281%, and that's adjusted for inflation.
Yeah.
Private schools. 1970. You want to go to a private school instead of a public school. How much is your tuition for a year?
For 1 year, I don't know, $2,600. That's a guess. I don't have any idea by 1970.
No, you're not terribly off. About $1,800. Adjusted for inflation, it comes to about 11,900.
Okay.
So about 11,900 per year for a private school in 1970. You know how much a private school in 2019 is going to cost you?
Beats me.
Take a guess. This is fun.
It's not fun to be pulling shit out of my ass. I don't know. 40 grand.
You're not too far off. 36.
Okay, yeah, not too far off. That's insane.
So that's an increase of about 200%.
Wild. And that's to get a lower paying job.
That's a private 4-year degree.
To get a lower paying job in 2019 dollars.
Right. So you're paying anywhere between 200% and 300% for a degree that is going to earn you Median, 40% less.
So I feel like basically we're running the same race as somebody who did it 40 years before us. But it's actually a little bit longer of a race, and we have a weighted vest on.
Mm-hmm.
Is really kind of what it sounds like. And there's maybe like, some pits of fire or some shit that we got.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, here's it. All right. So I also looked up tax rates. So if you start to earn a whole bunch of money, so in 1970, just take a guess what the top marginal rate was, the maximum percentage you would have to pay in tax. What was the top marginal rate in 1970?
Oh, I don't
Actually, hold on. Let's just set. Well, in 2019, what was the top marginal rate?
What is it, like 35?
You're pretty close, 37.
Yeah. Okay. Back then, though, I don't have any idea. 25?
Go the other direction.
Higher?
Way higher.
Really? Oh shit! I don't have any idea. 50%. I'm just pulling numbers out of my ass.
72. Top marginal rate was 72%.
How the fuck does that even work? How do you get taxed 72%?
Well, you tax 72% when you hit the top marginal rate. So you'll have like bracket 1, you're taxed at 10%. The next bracket is 25%. The next bracket's 40%. The next bracket's 70%, or however it works.
Well,
so you kind of go up income in steps.
And that's bringing people much closer together economically.
Yeah, because if you're earning a shitload of money, well, you're only earning 28 cents on the dollar after let's say it's $1 million is where you have the 72%. Mm-hmm. So after $1 million, you're only earning 28 cents on every dollar that you're in above $1 million. Now I'm making those numbers up, but that's how marginal tax rates work. So it means that like it shrinks inequality because the rich are paying a lot more money back to the government. And ostensibly, the government's using that to provide benefits for everybody.
And now our top rate is 37%. So it's literally almost the reverse.
About half.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a lot harder in 1970 to get way ahead, but that's going about the whole wealth inequality thing, which we talked about with the median and average wages. So, let's talk about, vehicle cost is actually one that I didn't think of immediately, but if you think about it, unless you live in like a big city like New York, how essential is having a vehicle to being able to work?
Well, look, when I was not when I first moved to New York City, but when I first became a real estate agent and was really struggling, my mom said to me, Just, you're paying all this money in rent. You should just come live at home, rent free. It would be rent free. And I'm like, sure, but one, I'd be living at home and that would kind of suck. But like, I'd be down for it if there were other upsides. But I'd also have to buy a car first. And cars are not cheap. Even a cheap car is not cheap. Like I don't have $2,500 or $4,000 to buy a piece of crap car.
Well, and also, how are you going to work if you're living in Middleburg or Albany? How are you going to get to New York City every day?
But I would obviously have to give up the career that I was working on, sure, and then find another job. So it was a basically impossible situation, and I'm glad I didn't. It was a very generous offer, but I'm glad I didn't take her up on that offer. But having to buy a car to do a job, you have to anywhere outside of a very very dense urban area like Chicago or DC or New York City, you need to have your own vehicle. Or
you're spending an hour and a half or 2 hours to get to work in a drive that might take 15 or 20 minutes.
Yeah, on buses or something like that.
Right, and I'm all for making public transportation better, but I can understand why people don't want to do it because it's really inefficient. If you're in New York City, it might be faster to take the subway than to drive. But
many times it is. And I only lived a mile and a half from the office.
But
a mile from the office. So
right. So I'm going to say that with the exception of big cities like New York and like Chicago and stuff like that, having a vehicle is kind of another one of those barriers to entry. So let's figure out what was the average cost of a vehicle in 1970. And this is probably new vehicles. I wasn't able to find used data. It's hard, but like it still tells us something. Average price of in 1970s dollars. New vehicle.
I'm gonna go with $6,500.
You're pretty far off.
Fuck, really?
If we go by percentage, you're off by about 100%. It's like $3,500.
Oh, I was high?
Yeah.
I was gonna say there's no way 1970 a car cost more than wow.
So you adjust it up for inflation, you're just shy of 23 grand. So a brand new car in 1970 average cost 23 grand.
Inflation price.
Inflation price.
Okay, average cost of a new car now. I can't think of a car that would cost in the 20,000s. Maybe like a small, like one of the small Nissans or Kia or a
Yeah,
small,
but remember, we got to take the average.
yeah. Well, okay.
We're not talking about your average economy car. We're not going with the cheapest car because that would be hard to measure. Like I had to just pull whatever statistics I could find. I didn't have a chance to do a deep dive.
So I'll take average. And again, nobody's buying a car now in cash. Back then, I feel like a lot more people were buying cars in cash.
Well, that's because their median wage was higher.
Yeah, no shit. All right. So what's the average price of a vehicle right now?
You haven't guessed yet.
It's a guessing game. You're like asking me to guess what your favorite color is. Well, that beats me. Or what your brother's favorite color is. I have no idea. What's the average price of a car in 2019? 40,000.
Pretty close.
Really?
About 37.
Wow. That still seems higher than I would think, but I guess like everybody's driving. I don't know.
Yeah.
But can I ask you a question? Remember when we grew up? I don't remember, or where we grew up, maybe. I don't remember seeing new cars. I don't.
Well, in the winter, no car looks new.
Yeah, but I just don't remember, like even in school, like even people's parents. I don't remember seeing a car that was like 1, maybe 2 years old, oldest, on a regular basis. And if it was usually a kind of low-end car. And maybe that speaks about like the neighborhoods that we came from. Like I think,
Possibly.
I think it was nice to get like a used car, that was in good shape. But I don't remember a lot of people that had brand new cars.
No, not really.
Yeah. Now, like I look around up and down the block, everybody's got a brand new car or two that's, maximum 5 years old, but probably 2 or 3 years old in their driveway. And I'm just like how? When did this happen? Everybody's got this brand new car.
Yeah, my two cars are 6 years old and 27 years old.
Well, 6 years old sounds pretty new to me.
Yeah, but yeah, the point is, so 62% increase in average vehicle cost. Now, I'm sure that if you look at budget cars, that might not be quite so bad. I don't know. That data is a lot harder to get. But the point is, the barriers for entry have gone up a lot. The rewards for entry have gone down.
Yeah. So the barriers of entry have gone up, and then there's not much payoff for getting involved in the game.
Nope.
At all. That's a lot of people. I don't know if you noticed, there's a big trend of people leasing cars and renting apartments because there's not a huge upside with the ownership aspect of it.
Well, that's just, I can understand like rent sometimes. If you want to live in New York City, to be able to buy property in New York City is really, really hard. So a lot of people rent in New York City because there's not really any other choice. But when it comes to leasing cars, that's pretty much always a terrible financial decision.
Well, it's just money out the window. Yeah. But financing a car is also tough if you buy something relatively new, because if you finance a brand new car, you're just losing money right up, you ball up the money and throw it out the window over your first year, or just, in the first week, because
I've got a friend in Charleston that works in real estate, actually doing property management, and he's got a background in accounting. And every 2 or 3 years, so he always buys a brand new car, and every 2 or 3 years he'll trade in that brand new car, that 2 or 3 year old car, for a brand new car. And I said, dude, you've got a background in accounting, you understand depreciation. Why in the world are you constantly cycling a car that has depreciated some for a car that's going to depreciate even more?
So, but that's the price you're paying to own something brand new, which is why financing brand new and leasing a brand new car really doesn't, there's no bigger upside on one or the other. But that's if you want to buy a new car.
At least if you're financing the car, like some portion of those payments that you're making are going towards the underlying asset. Whereas leasing, all you're doing is paying for the depreciation of the car, and you're not even getting anything at the end.
But if you're going to buy a new car in 2 or 3 years, you're making payments towards the value of the asset, but then you're buying a new asset and dropping the old one at a loss for the old one.
Oh, yeah, no, I told him it was a stupid idea, and he said he knew. I said, come on, man, you're smarter than this. I know you.
But I think, to me, it kind of goes back to the, when we were kids, if a VCR broke, our parents would take it to a VCR and TV repair shop. I see perfectly good TVs like out on the sidewalk on a very regular basis.
Well, that's because partially things these days are harder to repair, and it's actually cheaper to replace something than it is to repair it.
That may be true. But still, I think it's easier to. There's a lot of durable goods that I don't know. It's just wild that we're spending so much money on things that used to proportionally cost way, way, way less.
Yo, let's hit the comments real quick and see what people are saying to this.
Well, I also have some other stuff I want to add about some of the different generations, just kind of lifestyle stuff.
But let's hit the comments before we get too much farther away from them.
Like $3,000 or more as soon as you drive it off the lot.
Yep.
Probably more than that, depending if it's a $40,000. What was the average price 2019?
37.
Okay, so it's $37,000 car.
Probably looking at like $7,000 right off the lot.
Yeah, I mean it depends. It also depends on how you're reselling it. But my first brand new car 2 years ago, good for you. New cars were luxuries, and I think new cars are much more common now. Back then, they used to be literally luxuries.
Agree.
Let's see. More millions today is not about your education. It's about who you know. I think it's always been about who you know.
It's hard to say whether that was more prevalent in the 70s or not. I don't know. That's an impossible question for me to answer right now.
Yeah. Valeria said, I'm Generation X. And some other stuff not quite relevant. And then we got over here on TikTok. Let's see what else we got here. Could you speak more slowly? A lot of people on TikTok watch us aren't from the US. A lot of Spanish speakers. So it's my bad. Sorry, guys. I think Rosh is watching on Facebook, so I'm going to catch the Facebook comments in a minute. Where's the argument here?
The argument has been laid out in that wages are lower now comparatively. Costs for entry into higher earning markets are much higher than they were. And the two primary ways that you build wealth, be it through purchasing a home or buying a vehicle so that you can drive to work more efficiently, have also gone up. So it costs more to get into the game. It costs more to stay in the game. It costs more to build wealth, and you're earning less.
Okay, so the way that I would deal with this, and this is a generational gap issue, and you'll see where I'm going in a second, is what I would say is, all right, so that's the playing field. What are you going to do about it? Whereas a lot of people are just going to say, well, I'm fucked, so I'm just not, I'm going to take it, and this is, the hand that I've been dealt. So
my argument isn't to say that we should engage in defeatism as millennials. I think what I'm trying to do is make the case that the criticism that's lobbed at millennials is unfair.
Fair enough, but a lot of millennials are just playing that victim card and saying, I still want my fifth place trophy. You have to give me something.
I'm not endorsing that.
Okay, fair enough. Let me just get, because we got a couple on Facebook. We got Rosh says, I think we're beginning a new baby boom. People are staying home, doing drugs, and making babies. We might see a funky generation in 20 years.
That's an interesting idea.
Barry, who interned for us for a while, he said, how about alimentation? I don't know what that word means. Alimentation?
Spell it.
Alimentation.
It's a Spanish word.
No, I don't think he's Spanish. Rosh also said education is slipping. You go to school, get a diploma, you need to get a job, but no one explains the criteria for perfect job, how to manage your earnings. Schools need to teach financial literacy. A couple things, because I took some notes about some generations. I'll share some information with you. But what I found was that Generation X, which was right before us, basically, was the first generation where there was a really big slide in people reproducing, like people basically weren't having as many babies. And then with our generation in most developed nations, population increases have pretty much slowed. And let's see, Generation X. Also, when it comes to divorce rates, Generation X had much higher divorce rates than baby boomers. And then actually our generation, it looks like, has had less divorces than our parents. So that the divorce rates slowing down a little bit.
Probably because the marriage rate's also gone down.
The marriage rates have gone down too. Yeah, I don't know what population they're sampling from, the full population, I assume. So you have a good point there. And then let's see, millennials have less sex than previous generations, which again, we're talking about developed nations. And that's probably true, which is really lousy. So millennials, Generation X and Generation Y, basically, are characterized by entitlement and a dependence on technology. They're also less religious. So, but I believe that comes along with information and,
Yeah, the technology and the religion, you have to think that there's a connection.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think back in the day, you would say, well, we don't know what causes that. It must be God. We don't know where that comes from. It must be God. And you don't quite have that when you have answers to questions. And we have a lot more answers to questions than it is what it is, because that's how God wants it to be.
Yeah.
And then what else do I have? The most recent generation, Generation Z. Is that what I called it before? I feel like,
yeah, because then there's Generation Alpha, but they're still like kids in elementary school, so they don't count.
Z, which would be like teenagers, maybe early 20s right now. They are risk averse, which does not surprise me.
No.
And so Generation Z really didn't exist before the internet. So it's like late 90s.
I kind of look at them as like the Facebook generation.
Sure. Yeah, but Facebook wasn't there.
2004, if you were born in 1996 or 1997, Facebook came out right as you were starting to get comfortable reading and writing and stuff.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. But I mean, it's just wild to, like, we know all this stuff prior to this huge technology boom. Like, we had rotary phones and we had record players and we barely had record. They were still around, but it was a technology that was kind of still going out, but there was nothing digital. Was there anything digital other than calculators when we were kids?
Well, I mean, besides the computers that we were using, but televisions were analog.
Yeah.
Cell phones didn't really exist.
No, yeah. So we can barely remember it, but imagine just not having any, like, you have so much at your fingertips now that you didn't before. And also Generation Z, the newest generation, who's not infants, declining cognitive abilities. Yeah, how about that? Also, freedom of speech isn't as important to them if it's offensive. If somebody says something offensive, they shouldn't be allowed to say that. Whereas our generation or any other generation, freedom of speech should just be like your right to bear arms. Like, you should be able to have an Uzi and a fucking rocket launcher.
And say fuck you while you're fired both of them off.
Yeah. But now, if you say something, that's racist or offensive, that the government should be able to shut you up, and that's definitely a tricky discussion. But
I think we need to. Yeah, that's one that I'd like to dive into more, but like that's going to take some time to kind of tease out why that is.
Well, but the thing is, it's crazy that like Facebook or Twitter would have to pull the plug on some people's accounts. But that's like saying you have a public park, and the public park is policed by the police, and you could pretty much do and say whatever you want in that park. But now you have certain people gathering with like firearms in the public park, or they're planning to blow up buildings. At a certain point, the public park police are going to have to say, "Sorry, you can't be here."
Yeah.
Right. And because they're the only people responsible for that park. So that's kind of what's happening with like Facebook and Twitter. Somebody's got to be responsible for that territory, given it's not physical space, but it is. You can open up your physical device and it's physically displayed in front of you via pixels. So that's as physical as it gets. But it's a really tricky territory when it comes to freedom of speech. But ultimately, it's a private platform, right?
Right. It's not the government regulating it. And ultimately, if a private company decides to regulate speech one way or the other, an economist would argue that the free market's going to basically decide whether or not the company made the right decision, because if they're too restrictive, then people won't use it. And if they're too permissive, people might not use it. So the companies are going to strike the right balance based on economics.
But if somebody comes to my house and says something racist, or they want to incite a riot, or they want to fight one of my other friends, and I ask them to leave, right, and then they don't want to leave, I'm like, all right, well, then I'm calling the police and you're being escorted out of here. That's my right, because this is my platform. If I had, and therefore, I would think if you were running an app like Twitter or Facebook, and somebody who's using your app, who's a guest effectively to your app, says something that you don't like, you technically have the right to take them off there. Does that politicize you? Hell yeah. You can't argue that it doesn't, because you're taking a stance against something, which is politics. Mm-hmm. And then again, just like you said, free market. The market's going to, have an effect on you. If you shut up the lead Republican and every Republican person wants to not use your app anymore, that's fine. And yeah, everything's run by somebody. So Amazon running the servers for the Parler app and shutting it down, like, you guys need an Amazon. So if you want to build your own thing, I guess that's what you got to do. But
the internet's not going to stop you, but like, you don't get to, like, instead of renting server space from Amazon, now you might have to find the money to build your own servers. And if you can do it, then go ahead.
But if you're within your legal right, and then it's not going to be on Amazon. It won't be on Twitter. It'll be on the U.S. government.
And the U.S. government really won't do anything unless they can find like actual crimes being advocated.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's, I don't know, maybe it'll go there. I definitely think there's enough money to make that happen. So
yeah. I looked up some statistics real quick about birth rate.
Okay.
So these are births per 1,000 people. And I'm just going to select a couple years because it's on like a slider.
Okay.
So like 1950, from like 1950 until 1960, it was like 23 to 25 per 1,000. It started to drop really hard in 1960, went from 23 all the way down to 15 in 1978. So by like 1980, it was about 15 on the dot. And then it kind of rose a little bit.
Is this a global?
U.S.
Oh, it's just the U.S. That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah. So in 1980, it was 15 per 1,000 people. And in 2020, it was 12.
Wow. And then what's that? Can you pull global data?
Yeah, I should be able to.
Because I'll bet you the global data hasn't changed as drastically. And basically saying that developing nations like India, and I guess you could probably lump China in there, and probably not Russia because it's cold and people probably don't have as much sex.
Yeah.
But developing nations, typically people have more sex, and my guess is probably unprotected and at a younger age, and having more babies.
Yeah, this is gonna be harder to find global. I can find like every country. I can find the highest and the lowest, but
So what country has the biggest population, China or India? I think it's India.
China has the highest population. But if we're talking about birth rate versus, are we talking about birth rate or are we talking about population?
Well, right now we're talking about both, but let's go with birth rate.
Birth rate, mostly countries in Africa. Niger, Chad, Somalia, Mali, Congo, Angola, Burundi, Gambia, Uganda, Burkina Faso, Nigeria.
Is
Like
our
every
highest birth rate?
all the top countries are in Africa.
All right.
Like the first 20 are all Africa.
So, but what do you think? What do you think is going to happen with this new generation, the alpha generation? And where do you think Generation Z is going to be in a decade? Or, you know, if you want to adjust for Generation Alpha and give them the same benefit of the doubt in 2 decades? What do you think are these going to be more successful? Are they going to have higher birth rates, higher divorce rates? What do you think?
I have no idea. I just have no clue. I haven't thought about it, and I just don't know. I think that things are too much in flux right now to be able to really be able to make solid predictions because there's so much that's changing right now.
I think technology is going to have the biggest effect, but I also feel like if you were to ask in 1970, what's the next generation or two going to look like, and that person would say, those lucky motherfuckers, everything's going to be given to them. All this work that we're putting in, they're going to have it so easy. You know, right now we have telephones and TVs and radio, and they're getting all that. And when we were growing up, we didn't have any of this. We couldn't talk to somebody on the other side of the country.
You know what's funny? So when you're talking about that, when I think about, like, I actually look at it as, I'm really glad that I grew up at the time that I did, because I look at the kids today with the interconnectedness and the social media and everything else, and I say, I'm lucky to have not grown up with that.
Yeah, but you and I at a pretty early age were on desktop computers a lot of time.
True.
But we also existed before that. So, you know, it's technology is going to be part of life, almost like cybernetics. You know, I think
about it like this: when you got your driver's license, how many years did you drive and went to places for the first time, a place that you'd never been before? How many years did you drive without GPS?
Oh yeah,
Think about being able to just go to a place and be like, I'm just going to get there somehow.
Yeah. Okay, were you going somewhere with that?
Just in terms of
how we had to figure it out?
Yeah.
Well, you know, but listen to this. Being lost is pretty much going to be a non-thing. No one's pretty soon, no one is
that already doesn't exist. If you have a GPS phone, you're never lost. You cannot get lost today. You have to actively try to get lost.
I went and bought a grill and threw it in the back of the truck. And on my way back, my phone died, and I didn't know where I was coming from. Both phones died, actually, and I don't have a charger.
Good planning.
Yeah, right? I'd managed to figure out, basically, just using kind of reasoning and knowing which way I was going and relatively where I was, that if I went enough in one direction, I'd run into a road that I knew, and I could follow that road in the right direction, and it would bring me to a road that I knew, and then I'd just be able to figure it out.
Yeah, that's how navigation works.
Yeah, but some people, I feel like...
No, they don't have that skill.
They never would have got home.
They'd still be driving.
But it was a very weird feeling for me of being lost, and it had been so long since I had truly had no idea where I was and no solution to get where I wanted to be. So that was that was kind of weird. It's kind of cool, but it's kind of weird. What else you want to add about that generational stuff?
I feel like I've made my case.
You know, I don't think it looks good. I don't think it looks good for the next few generations. I think there's going to be, especially if there's like some what's the thing in the Terminator where all the electronics basically merge? What is that called?
Singularity.
You know, if there is ever like AI and there's technology issues and stuff, I feel like there's going to be a whole generation of people that are just, if this technology thing that we're working on right now blows up in our face, there's going to be a lot of people who can't do things in an analog world.
One of my best friends in Charleston, whom you haven't met, his single biggest fear is like the robot uprising.
Well, I've been painting here, and I've been listening to a lot of podcasts. I was listening to a lot of technology stuff, physics stuff, and a lot of Elon Musk was just kind of like, when you're watching YouTube and you don't choose the next video and something pops on, oftentimes it was Elon Musk talking about AI and things like that, and how unregulated it is and how it can be weaponized, and how we're not that far off. Just think right now, somebody can hack your phone and you're fucked. If somebody really hacks your phone, they have all your financial data. If somebody hacked my phone and I hadn't bought a train ticket on my way home, I wouldn't be able to get home if I didn't have cash on me. Like I'd be done. And if they hacked all my bank accounts and the banks shut me down, locked me out, I'd be fucked. And that could be done in minutes, and it could really fuck with me. So what I'm saying is I think a lot of people we have a generation of people who just don't know how to do shit. Like the cool thing about being in this house in the suburbs is I like doing stuff with my bare hands. And I'm always like, I grew up changing my own oil, changing my own brakes, changing my own brake lines.
I remember that day.
But the thing is, like, a lot of this shit I didn't know how to do. I just kind of figured it out. And I would call a lot of it Dunning-Kruger. Like, you know what Dunning-Kruger is?
Yep. The less you know, the more confident you are in your abilities.
Exactly. So I get kind of ass over, whatever the phrase is. But I get into something and realize I have no fucking idea what I'm doing. And the only way to deal with it is to just like take it step by step, work your way through it, go get a book, something like that, go get the workshop manual for whatever car, and you just break it down into smaller parts. All I'm getting at though is I feel like a lot of people, one, wouldn't try that. I feel like Dunning-Kruger is in effect way more than ever, but still people don't take action. So
I mean, I see it all the time when people ask me for help. I'm just like, you can do this, because what I'm going to do doesn't require any special skills. I just have the confidence to do it. Where like one of my friends asked me to like take apart his laptop and figure out why something was making a noise, and I was like,
you unscrew the screws. The toughest part is screwing them back in.
Yeah. The hardest part of the task was getting the right spec screws.
I get really upset in the office when something happens with the printer, and I can be a dick sometimes. I'm like, look, I've never seen this problem before. I've never faced this problem before. If I can fix this, this just means that you were dumber than me. Do you want to give it a shot before I do it? And a lot of people will be like, oh, I'll try to figure, give me a, I'm like, well, you just look at the error. And if it doesn't say out of paper and you replace the paper, if it says something else, you don't know if there's a code, Google it. It could be whatever. Maybe you just turn it off and turn it back on. It works. But a lot of people, so I use Dunning-Kruger as an advantage to me. Like I do a lot of shit and I'm just going to do it. Like it seems easy enough, I'm going to do it. And then I'm like, fuck, this is way tougher than I thought. But I still figured it out from there. A lot of people have Dunning-Kruger. They have that effect where they think something's simple, but a lot of people just don't take action these days.
Yeah. Although on the topic of Dunning-Kruger, I'm reminded of a time that we as a family took you out to Massachusetts and we played candlepin bowling.
Okay.
With like the smaller bowling balls and the narrow sticks.
We must have been what, like 13 or 14 years old?
Somewhere in that range.
I don't
But I
think we
remember,
tried at that point.
like, candlepin bowling's really hard because the ball's small and hard to control, and the pins are smaller. And I remember, like you were strong, and like the ball was small, so you could really throw it hard. And so, like, you threw a gutter ball, and then your response was just to throw it harder, which just meant that you threw a faster gutter ball.
Is this Dunning-Kruger or?
Yeah, because like you got the confidence of like, all right, I can really whip this thing. Here we go. And you would just make a bigger dent in like the back catch area without touching it, like in like a slightly stronger breeze as it whizzed by the pins without touching them. But that's, to me, that's Dunning-Kruger effect, is like, I'm just going to try harder, and I'm like, look how fast I can throw this, but the results aren't getting any better.
I'm gonna look up the actual definition of Dunning-Kruger. Dunning-Kruger is a type of cognitive bias in which people believe that they are smarter and more capable than they really are. Essentially, low ability people do not possess the skills needed to recognize their own incompetence.
Yep. Which is pretty much what I said, is like, the less ability you have, the more confidence you have in your own abilities.
Yeah.
Which is you candlepin bowling.
But what I'm getting at is I've used it to my advantage to just figure shit out. In that case, I didn't. I really didn't.
Yeah, and that's what I tell people all the time. It's like, when I have something that's broken, I'm going to try my best to fix it. And one of two things is going to happen. I'm either going to fix it and I've learned how to fix it, or it's going to get even more broken, and I'll reach a certain point. I'm like, all right, I've screwed this up bad enough. I actually do need to bring it to somebody who knows what they're doing. But then I'll learn that way too. But I will run as hard as I can until I hit a wall that I can't bust through.
Yeah. That's a good quality to have. On that note, I think we sign off, and this concludes episode 71 of SipTalk. I don't know how we're going to title this, but at this point, if you're listening to this, you are the weakest generation.
Generational warfare.
Yeah, it is. All right, James, I will catch you later.
Later.
And that wraps us up. If you have not already, please subscribe. That helps us out big time. And always comment and let me know what you think of the episode. See you guys soon.
I like PBR. I just got priced out of it.